The night of March 6, 2013, draped Springfield, Illinois, in an eerie stillness. Nestled in the heart of suburban tranquility, the streets seemed frozen under the pale glow of streetlights. The pristine homes with their manicured lawns stood shoulder to shoulder, each projecting an image of perfection. The kind of neighborhood where people waved warmly, exchanged pleasantries, and pretended their lives were as seamless as their painted fences. But behind one of those polished doors, a storm was brewing, one that would shatter the illusion of serenity and leave a trail of devastation in its wake. At precisely 10:13 p.m., the last light flickered off in the Morris household. Shadows crept along the quiet cul-de-sac, a silent prelude to the chaos that lay ahead. Inside the house, Lena Morris sat alone in the living room, cradling a glass of wine. Her hands trembled slightly, but whether from the chill of the March air or the weight of her thoughts, she couldn't say. She glanced at her reflection in the darkened window, her face as composed as ever, yet her eyes betrayed a restlessness that had taken root long ago. Lena, 38, was the picture of suburban perfection. She had it all: a handsome husband, Ryan, a corporate executive who often traveled for work, and 2 children who excelled in school. The house, the car, the lifestyle, it was everything she had ever wanted. Or so she thought. Yet beneath the surface, Lena's life was hollow. The long nights alone, the silent dinners when Ryan was home, and the stifling monotony of managing a picture-perfect family weighed heavily on her. Her days, filled with yoga classes, charity luncheons, and carefully curated conversations with the other neighborhood wives, felt like an endless performance. And Lena, the star of the show, was beginning to falter. It was during one of those lonely afternoons that Lena first noticed Emma Clark. Emma, 22, had just returned home from college for a break, bringing with her an energy that Lena found intoxicating. Emma was everything Lena wasn't anymore: young, carefree, vibrant. She often sat on the front porch of her parents' home, a book in her hand and a soft smile playing on her lips. Jack and Clark, Emma's parents, were longtime neighbors of the Morris family, and their daughter had always been a fixture of the neighborhood. But to Lena, Emma suddenly seemed different, her presence electric and impossible to ignore. The first conversation between Lena and Emma had been casual, even polite. A quick exchange about the changing weather, a shared lament about the relentless winter. But something lingered in the air between them, a spark that neither of them could fully understand, yet both felt unmistakably. Lena found herself drawn to Emma in ways she couldn't explain, and Emma, while initially intrigued by Lena's sophistication and poise, began to sense an undercurrent of intensity in her neighbor's gaze. As the days turned into weeks, their paths crossed more frequently. Lena, under the guise of friendly chats and neighborly walks, sought out opportunities to be near Emma. She laughed more easily in her presence, felt lighter, more alive. And Emma, unaware of the depth of Lena's growing fascination, welcomed the attention. After all, Lena seemed like someone who had everything figured out, a mentor, perhaps even a friend. But beneath Lena's smiles and warm demeanor lay a storm of emotions she could no longer contain. What started as an innocent connection would soon spiral into something far more dangerous, setting the stage for a tragedy that would forever haunt the quiet streets of Springfield. The Morris household had always been a beacon of perfection. On that fateful night, no one could have imagined the darkness that had seeped through its walls. Lena Morris had spent years cultivating the life others envied. Her mornings began with freshly brewed coffee and a meticulously arranged kitchen, the sunlight streaming through spotless windows as if choreographed to emphasize her perfection. She was a constant presence at school meetings, charity events, and yoga retreats, a woman whose every move was deliberate and graceful. Yet, behind her polished exterior lay a woman teetering on the edge of discontent. Lena had married Ryan Morris at 25. He was ambitious, sharp, and impossibly charming, the kind of man who made promises of forever seem credible. Their first years together were full of passion and laughter, marked by shared dreams and late-night confessions. But over time, Ryan's career consumed him. As he climbed the corporate ladder, Lena found herself more often alone in their sprawling suburban home, tending to their 2 children and maintaining the veneer of their perfect family. Ryan provided everything they needed, everything except his presence. To the outside world, Lena was radiant, the archetype of the flawless suburban wife. Inside, however, her heart ached for something she couldn't name. The hours stretched endlessly as she floated through days filled with mindless errands and superficial conversations. The once vivid dreams she'd had as a younger woman were now dusty relics of a life that felt increasingly suffocating. She yearned for connection, for intimacy, for someone who truly saw her. Emma Clark's return to the neighborhood was a storm Lena hadn't anticipated. The 22-year-old daughter of Jack and Clark, Emma had spent the last 4 years at college upstate, studying art and exploring the world beyond Springfield's manicured lawns. She had always been a bright, energetic presence, a girl with a quick wit and an infectious laugh. But the woman who returned home that March was different. There was a quiet confidence in Emma now, a maturity that made her seem both familiar and entirely new. Emma often sat on the front steps of her parents' house, sketchbook in hand, lost in thought. Her hair, dyed a shade lighter than Lena remembered, caught the sunlight like a beacon. Lena couldn't help but notice her. At first, it was casual, a fleeting observation during her afternoon walks. But soon, Lena found her gaze lingering a little too long, her steps slowing as she passed the Clark home. The first time they spoke, it was innocuous. Lena had complimented Emma's drawings, asking if she'd always been this talented. Emma had laughed, brushing off the praise, but there had been a warmth in her response that lingered with Lena long after the conversation ended. The next time they spoke, it lasted longer, discussions of books, college life, and the peculiarities of small-town living. Emma seemed fascinated by Lena's stories of her youth, and Lena felt a spark she hadn't experienced in years. Their conversations became a routine, evolving from polite exchanges to something deeper. Emma admired Lena's poise and wisdom, while Lena found herself drawn to Emma's vibrancy and optimism. To Emma, Lena was an elegant, worldly mentor. To Lena, Emma was a reminder of everything she had lost and everything she still craved. But beneath the surface of their growing bond, tensions began to brew. Lena's interest in Emma deepened, shifting from admiration to something far more complex. She lingered in Emma's presence longer than necessary, her compliments more effusive, her gaze lingering. Emma, at first flattered, began to sense an intensity in Lena that made her uneasy. There was a hunger in Lena's eyes, a longing that Emma didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. For Lena, Emma represented an escape from her stifling life, a chance to reclaim the passion and excitement she had buried long ago. But for Emma, the dynamic with Lena became increasingly blurred, the lines between friendship, mentorship, and something unspoken growing dangerously thin. As spring bloomed around them, so did the seeds of a connection that defied logic and convention. Their lives, once separate and orderly, began to intertwine in ways neither could predict. The seemingly innocent bond between Lena and Emma was no longer so innocent, setting the stage for a collision that would unravel them both. It began innocently enough, or at least, that's how Lena Morris justified it to herself. She told herself there was nothing wrong with finding comfort in Emma Clark's company. Emma was, after all, young and full of life, a radiant presence that filled the void left by Ryan's relentless absence. What harm could there be in a friendship? But friendships don't usually involve stolen glances, lingering touches, or a quickening heartbeat every time the other person enters the room. Their meetings grew more frequent, slipping seamlessly into Lena's daily routine. A quick stop by Emma's house on her way back from yoga. An invitation for coffee after Lena's morning errands. Walks through the neighborhood park where the quiet trails offered them privacy. Each interaction deepened their bond, and the initial spark Lena felt turned into something she could no longer deny. For the first time in years, she felt alive, desired, even, and it was intoxicating. For Emma, the relationship felt different. At first, she saw Lena as a mentor, someone who carried an air of elegance and wisdom. Emma enjoyed their conversations and the way Lena's stories made her feel grounded during a time of uncertainty in her own life. But as Lena's compliments grew more personal, her laughter more eager, Emma began to notice the way Lena looked at her. It was a look that sent shivers down her spine, not entirely unpleasant, but undeniably unsettling. The moment their friendship crossed the line came on a warm spring evening. The two women sat in Lena's backyard, the last light of day casting long shadows across the patio. Lena had poured them both a glass of wine, her laughter more uninhibited than usual. Emma shared a story about her college days, and Lena leaned in closer, her eyes locked onto Emma's with an intensity that seemed to momentarily steal the younger woman's breath. "You're so remarkable, Emma," Lena murmured, her voice low, almost reverent. Emma blushed, unsure how to respond. She looked away, only to feel Lena's hand on hers, the touch light but deliberate. When Emma finally turned back, their faces were mere inches apart. What happened next felt like a blur. Emma leaned back instinctively, but Lena closed the gap, her lips brushing against Emma's in a kiss that was both tentative and charged with emotion. For a moment, Emma froze, her mind racing, but then she kissed back. The boundary between them dissolved in an instant, leaving nothing but the raw thrill of the forbidden. From that night on, their relationship was no longer just a friendship. They became careful, cautious, aware that what they were doing was wrong. But the very wrongness of it added to the allure, making each stolen moment all the more exhilarating. Lena would send her children off to school and wait until Ryan left for work before calling Emma over. They met in secluded corners of the park, in Lena's car, or even at Emma's house when her parents weren't home. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word carried a weight of secrecy and desire. For Lena, these moments with Emma were a drug. She couldn't get enough of the excitement, the thrill of feeling wanted, the escape from the suffocating monotony of her life. With Emma, she felt like the woman she used to be, bold, passionate, and alive. But for Emma, the affair was more complicated. The initial thrill began to wane as the weight of their actions settled in. She couldn't ignore the guilt gnawing at her, especially when she saw her parents or passed Ryan in the driveway. She began to question whether the excitement was worth the risk. Lena, however, refused to see the cracks forming in their relationship. She ignored the way Emma hesitated before their meetings, the way her responses to Lena's texts grew shorter. For Lena, Emma had become the center of her world, a lifeline in an otherwise drowning existence. But Emma was beginning to feel trapped, the secrecy and guilt threatening to consume her. The affair had started as a spark, a fleeting moment of connection, but it had now become a fire neither of them could control. What began as passion and excitement was transforming into something darker, setting the stage for a fallout neither woman could escape. By late May, the cracks in Lena Morris and Emma Clark's relationship were impossible to ignore. What had once been a thrilling escape for Lena had now become an all-consuming obsession, while Emma found herself increasingly suffocated by the weight of their secret. The vibrant connection that had ignited between them had turned into a tangled web of guilt, desperation, and power struggles. For Lena, every interaction with Emma had become a lifeline. She depended on the younger woman's presence in ways she didn't fully understand, or perhaps didn't want to admit. Emma had reignited something within her that she thought she had lost forever, a sense of purpose, excitement, and intimacy. But that flame had turned into a wildfire, consuming Lena's thoughts and clouding her judgment. She became hyper-aware of every shift in Emma's demeanor, every hesitation, every delayed reply to her messages. Each sign of distance from Emma pushed Lena further into panic. Emma, meanwhile, was unraveling under the strain of the affair. What had started as a source of excitement now felt like a burden she could no longer carry. She was tired of sneaking around, of looking over her shoulder, of pretending everything was normal when her life was anything but. The guilt gnawed at her every time she saw her parents, who trusted Lena implicitly, or passed Ryan, who greeted her with the polite kindness of a neighbor oblivious to the storm brewing within his own home. One sweltering afternoon in June, Emma made her decision. She couldn't keep living like this, couldn't keep lying to herself or the people she loved. It was time to end things with Lena. Her heart pounded as she typed out a message to Lena, asking to meet her at the park, a secluded spot they often used for their clandestine encounters. She knew the conversation wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to reclaim her life. Lena arrived early, pacing along the shaded trail where they had shared so many moments together. When Emma finally appeared, Lena's face lit up with relief, but the tightness in Emma's expression quickly dimmed her joy. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she approached, and her voice was unsteady as she began. "Lena, we can't keep doing this," Emma said, her words rushing out in a wave of emotion. "It's wrong. It's hurting both of us. I can't keep lying to everyone." Lena froze, her mind racing. "Hurting us? Emma, no. You don't mean that," she replied, her tone frantic. She reached for Emma's hand, but the younger woman stepped back, shaking her head. "I do mean it, Lena. This has to stop. I need to move on." "We both do," Emma said, her voice breaking. But Lena couldn't hear the finality in Emma's tone. The thought of losing Emma, of returning to the empty life she had before, was unbearable. Desperation tightened its grip on her heart. "You don't understand," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "You're the only thing keeping me together. I can't lose you." Emma stepped back again, her resolve hardening. "I'm sorry, Lena. I can't be that for you anymore." In that moment, something inside Lena snapped. The fear of abandonment, the realization that Emma was slipping away from her, these emotions collided in a storm of anger and desperation. Her voice sharpened, her previously pleading tone replaced with something colder. "If you leave," she said slowly, her eyes locking onto Emma's, "I'll tell everyone. Your parents, Ryan, everyone. They'll know what we've done, and you'll lose everything." Emma froze, her breath catching. The threat hung heavy in the air between them, suffocating and final. Lena's eyes gleamed with a dangerous determination, her desperation spilling over into manipulation. Emma's mind raced. She knew Lena wasn't bluffing. The weight of the ultimatum bore down on her, and she felt trapped in a way she had never experienced before. Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this to me?" she asked, but she already knew the answer. Lena's desperation to hold on to what they had blinded her to the harm she was causing. The tension in the air was palpable, their connection now twisted by fear, guilt, and control. Emma reluctantly agreed to continue the affair, her compliance driven not by love or desire, but by fear. As Lena watched her walk away, relief mixed with triumph coursed through her veins. But the moment was hollow, for the love and passion that had once bound them had now been replaced by something far darker. Their relationship, now poisoned by desperation and power, was hurtling toward an inevitable collapse. The affair had reached its breaking point, and the consequences of Lena's obsession would soon come crashing down on them both. The air in Springfield hung heavy on the afternoon of July 17, 2013. The sun blazed relentlessly, its heat pressing down on the quiet suburban neighborhood. Inside the Clark household, Emma was alone, her parents having gone out for the day. She sat in the living room, her sketchbook on the coffee table, though she hadn't touched it. Her mind had been restless ever since her last confrontation with Lena. Every text, every unexpected knock at the door, sent her heart racing with dread. She had tried to distance herself, but Lena's grip on her life seemed unrelenting. That day, Lena was more desperate than ever. Her calls to Emma had gone unanswered for 2 days, and the silence gnawed at her. Paranoia and frustration churned in her chest, a toxic mix that clouded her judgment. She had seen Emma walking with a young man earlier in the week, laughing and carefree, and the image was seared into her mind. Emma was moving on, slipping further away, and Lena felt powerless to stop it. The thought of losing Emma entirely was unbearable. By mid-afternoon, Lena's resolve solidified into something dark. She got into her car and drove to the Clark home. Her mind raced with what she would say to Emma, how she would make her understand that their connection couldn't end like this. But beneath her desperate longing was a simmering anger, an uncontrollable rage at being cast aside. When Lena arrived, she parked down the street, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Emma was startled when the doorbell rang. She peered through the window and froze. Lena stood on the porch, her expression a mix of determination and something Emma couldn't quite place. Reluctantly, Emma opened the door. "Lena, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice edged with irritation and fear. "We need to talk," Lena said, stepping inside uninvited. Her tone was clipped, her usual warmth replaced by an unsettling intensity. Emma hesitated but didn't stop her. She knew this conversation was inevitable. The exchange started tense but controlled. Lena pleaded with Emma to give their relationship another chance, to see that they belonged together. Emma, her voice shaking but firm, repeated what she had said before. "It's over, Lena. I can't do this anymore." But Lena wasn't listening. Her voice grew louder, more frantic, as she accused Emma of betraying her, of throwing away everything they had shared. "You don't understand what you mean to me," Lena cried, her hands trembling. "I gave you everything, and now you're just walking away." Emma's own frustration boiled over. "This isn't about us, Lena," she said sharply. "It's about you. You can't control me. You can't keep doing this." The words hit Lena like a slap, and something inside her broke. The pain of rejection twisted into a dark, uncontrollable fury. Her vision blurred with anger as she stepped closer to Emma, her voice now a low, dangerous whisper. "You think you can just leave me? After everything?" Emma's fear surged. She tried to back away, but Lena followed, her movements erratic. Emma raised her hands defensively. "Lena, stop. You need to leave." But Lena wasn't listening anymore. Her mind spiraled into chaos, consumed by the fear of losing Emma for good. Without thinking, Lena lunged. Her hands found Emma's neck, and she squeezed, the force of her desperation translating into brutal strength. Emma struggled, her nails clawing at Lena's arms, but Lena's grip only tightened. Tears streamed down Lena's face as she screamed, "You can't leave me. You can't." The struggle was short but violent. Emma's attempts to fight back grew weaker, her movements slowing until they stopped entirely. Her body went limp, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Lena's hands finally released, and Emma crumpled to the floor, lifeless. The room was eerily quiet except for Lena's ragged breathing. She stared at Emma's body in horror, her mind reeling as the reality of what she had done began to sink in. "No, no, no, no," she whispered, sinking to her knees beside Emma. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she tried to process the irreversible act she had committed. Panic overtook her. Lena knew she had to cover her tracks. She wiped away any evidence of her presence, overturning furniture and scattering items around the room to stage the scene as a burglary gone wrong. She grabbed a few valuables to make it convincing, a watch, some jewelry, and fled the house, leaving Emma's lifeless body behind. As she drove away, her hands gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline, Lena's mind raced with fear and disbelief. She told herself it wasn't her fault, that Emma had pushed her to this. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over Springfield as Lena disappeared into the evening. Inside the Clark home, Emma's body lay silent, a tragic ending to a connection that had spiraled out of control. The perfect facade of the neighborhood was shattered, and the darkness behind Lena's carefully curated life was about to come to light. The following morning, the serene streets of Springfield were shattered by a piercing scream. And Clark, returning home after a routine morning errand, found her daughter Emma lying lifeless in the living room. The room was in disarray, drawers pulled open, cushions strewn across the floor, and shards of glass glinting in the sunlight from a shattered picture frame. But none of it registered in Anne's mind. All she could see was Emma, motionless, pale, and impossibly still. Anne's cries drew the attention of a neighbor, who rushed over and immediately called 911. Within minutes, the quiet cul-de-sac was swarmed by flashing police lights and uniformed officers cordoning off the scene. Detective Harper Miles arrived shortly after, her sharp eyes scanning the house as she stepped inside. A seasoned investigator, Miles had seen her share of tragedies, but something about the scene felt off. The supposed burglary was messy, but it lacked the randomness she had come to expect from such crimes. The ransacked drawers looked too deliberate, the overturned furniture too calculated. Miles's initial walk-through confirmed her suspicions. The cause of death, manual strangulation, suggested something deeply personal, not the work of an opportunistic thief. Burglars typically avoided confrontations, and the brutality of Emma's death didn't align with a simple robbery gone wrong. This wasn't random, it was intimate. The detective's first step was to establish Emma's movements in the days leading up to her death. Interviews with her parents painted a picture of a young woman who was bright, ambitious, but recently distracted. Jack and Anne mentioned Emma had been spending more time alone and seemed distant, but they attributed it to the stress of post-college uncertainty. They also noted Emma had formed a close bond with their neighbor, Lena Morris, someone they had trusted implicitly. Lena was brought in for questioning as a matter of routine. She arrived at the station with a calm demeanor, expressing shock and sadness over Emma's death. She was like family, Lena said, her voice trembling. I can't believe this happened. Detective Miles observed her carefully, noting the slight tremor in her hands and the way her eyes darted to the side when answering certain questions. Her words were polished, almost rehearsed, but there was an undercurrent of unease that Miles couldn't ignore. As the investigation deepened, Miles turned to Emma's phone records. What she found raised immediate red flags. There were dozens of calls and messages between Emma and Lena in the months leading up to her death, many at odd hours and with cryptic, emotionally charged content. Phrases like, "We need to talk," and "I can't lose you," stood out, hinting at a relationship far more intense than Lena had let on. The phone records shifted the focus of the investigation. What had initially been approached as a potential burglary was now reframed as a possible crime of passion. Miles ordered a forensic analysis of the crime scene, and the results further implicated Lena. Fibers found on Emma's clothing matched a sweater that Lena had been seen wearing frequently. Though circumstantial, it was a crucial link placing Lena closer to the scene than she had admitted. A breakthrough came when a teenage neighbor came forward with a startling piece of information. The boy had been skateboarding near the Clark house on the afternoon of the murder and had seen Lena entering the home. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, as Lena was a familiar face in the neighborhood. But in hindsight, the sighting was damning, placing Lena at the scene during a critical window of time. Miles approached the new evidence with care, cross-referencing it with other leads to ensure its credibility. The testimony, combined with the phone records, the fibers, and Lena's increasingly suspicious behavior, painted a grim picture. However, the final blow came during a search of Lena's home. Hidden in a drawer, investigators found a distinctive piece of jewelry that Emma had been wearing on the day she died. It was a necklace, and Clark immediately identified as her daughter's favorite, a detail Lena couldn't convincingly explain. When confronted with the mounting evidence, Lena's composure began to crack. Her carefully constructed facade of innocence wavered under the weight of Miles's relentless questioning. Yet even as the walls closed in, Lena maintained her denial, claiming the necklace had been found during one of her walks and that she had meant to return it. But the explanation was flimsy, and Miles knew it. The investigation had reached its turning point. With enough evidence to connect Lena to the crime, Miles obtained a warrant for her arrest. The once respected housewife was taken into custody, her perfect image shattered. As she was led away in handcuffs, the neighborhood watched in stunned silence, struggling to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the monster she had become. Detective Miles, reviewing the case in her office later that evening, felt a familiar mix of satisfaction and sorrow. The pieces had fallen into place, but the cost was immeasurable. Emma Clark's life had been stolen, her potential snuffed out by a love that had turned toxic. And Lena Morris, a woman whose desperation had spiraled into obsession, would now face justice for the choices that had sealed both their fates. The walls were closing in on Lena Morris, and Detective Harper Miles knew it. What began as a puzzling investigation into Emma Clark's death was now rapidly unraveling into a case of obsession, betrayal, and violence. With each passing day, the evidence against Lena mounted, tightening the noose around her carefully constructed facade of innocence. The first significant breakthrough came with the forensic analysis of the crime scene. Fibers found on Emma's clothing matched those from a sweater Lena was often seen wearing during her daily walks. While not damning on its own, the match placed Lena dangerously close to the victim at the time of her death. Detective Miles flagged this as a key piece in the puzzle, knowing it would need to be paired with stronger evidence to seal the case. Next came the phone records. Over the past 6 months, Lena had contacted Emma more than anyone else in her life. The texts revealed a relationship that started friendly but grew increasingly intense. Early messages were innocuous, discussions about books or art. But as the months passed, the tone shifted. "You're the only one who understands me," read one message from Lena. Another, sent just days before Emma's death, was more ominous: "We need to talk. I can't lose you." These records painted a picture of Lena's escalating emotional dependency on Emma. While Emma's replies were polite and responsive at first, they grew shorter and less frequent, hinting at her discomfort and growing desire to pull away. The investigators couldn't ignore the implication: Emma had been trying to extricate herself from a relationship that had spiraled out of control. The most damning piece of evidence came from a teenage neighbor, who reluctantly stepped forward with information. On the afternoon of Emma's murder, the boy had been skateboarding near the Clark residence when he noticed Lena entering the home. At the time, it didn't seem suspicious. Lena often visited Emma's family, and she was well known in the neighborhood. But now, this sighting placed Lena at the scene during a critical timeframe, further dismantling her alibi. Detective Miles approached this testimony with caution, carefully cross-referencing it with other pieces of evidence. The timeline matched perfectly. Lena had no explanation for her whereabouts during that period, and the neighbor's account aligned with the growing narrative of her involvement. It was another nail in Lena's coffin. The turning point came during a search of Lena's home. Tucked away in a drawer, investigators found a piece of jewelry that Clark immediately identified as her daughter's favorite necklace. It was distinctive, a delicate silver chain with a small, intricate pendant that Emma wore almost daily. Its presence in Lena's possession was unexplainable. When questioned, Lena stammered through a flimsy excuse, claiming she had found it while walking through the park and intended to return it. But this only deepened Detective Miles's suspicion. Why would Lena keep the necklace hidden, rather than immediately informing Emma's family or the authorities? This discovery, combined with the other evidence, formed an unassailable case against Lena. The fibers, the phone records, the neighbor's testimony, and now the stolen necklace all pointed to one conclusion: Lena had been at the Clark house that day, and her actions were far from innocent. Detective Miles reviewed the case meticulously, ensuring every detail was accounted for. The messages between Lena and Emma revealed the former's increasing desperation and the latter's attempts to break free. The forensic evidence placed Lena at the scene, and the eyewitness account provided the missing link. The necklace tied it all together, a concrete, tangible connection between Lena and Emma's final moments. As the evidence mounted, Lena's composure began to crack. During another round of questioning, Detective Miles pressed her harder, using the necklace as leverage. "You didn't just find this, Lena," Miles said, her voice calm but unyielding. "It was with Emma when she died. How did it end up in your possession?" Lena's response was a mix of defiance and desperation, her voice trembling as she denied any involvement. But Miles could see through her facade. Every hesitation, every darting glance, betrayed the truth that Lena was fighting to conceal. The evidence was undeniable, and the case against her was airtight. By the end of the week, Detective Miles had gathered everything she needed to move forward. Lena Morris was officially charged with Emma Clark's murder. The neighborhood, once a picture of idyllic suburban life, was rocked by the news. Whispers of Lena's secret relationship with Emma spread like wildfire, leaving shock and disbelief in their wake. For Detective Miles, the case was far from over. She knew that bringing Lena to justice in court would require navigating the intricacies of a trial and countering whatever defense Lena's legal team might construct. But for now, she felt a grim satisfaction. The pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place, and the truth about Lena's dangerous obsession with Emma had finally come to light. The evidence had spoken, and it left no room for doubt. Lena Morris had crossed a line that could never be undone, and justice was now on her trail. The courtroom was packed on the day Lena Morris stood trial for the murder of Emma Clark. Journalists, neighbors, and curious onlookers filled every available seat, their murmurs dying down only when the judge entered. The once pristine image of Lena, a devoted mother and polished suburban wife, was now a shattered facade. Dressed in a simple blouse and slacks, she sat quietly, her expression calm but eyes betraying the storm within. This was the moment everything would be laid bare, and Lena knew there was no turning back. The prosecution wasted no time in presenting their case. They painted Lena as a woman consumed by obsession, driven to commit an unspeakable act when her desires were rejected. The opening arguments detailed the timeline of Lena's escalating fixation on Emma, her attempts to control the young woman, and the ultimate breaking point that led to Emma's death. Prosecutor Daniel Graves stood before the jury, his voice steady as he delivered a damning assertion: this wasn't a crime of passion. This was the calculated act of a woman who refused to let go. The prosecution relied heavily on the mountain of evidence gathered by Detective Harper Miles. First came the phone records, displayed on a large screen for the jury. Text after text from Lena to Emma revealed a desperate, possessive tone. "I can't lose you," one message read. "If you leave, I'll have nothing." Another, sent just days before the murder, was chilling in its simplicity: "We need to talk. Don't make me come find you." Next, the fibers found on Emma's clothing were presented, along with detailed forensic analysis linking them to a sweater Lena frequently wore. The prosecution emphasized the personal nature of the crime: manual strangulation, a method requiring close physical contact, driven by raw emotion. The piece de resistance was the necklace. And Clark testified tearfully, identifying the silver pendant as one Emma had worn daily since her 16th birthday. Its discovery in Lena's possession, hidden in a drawer, was the final piece of evidence that tied her to the crime scene. She never took it off, and said, her voice breaking, for it to be with Lena, she had no right. The prosecution's case was bolstered by the testimony of the teenage neighbor who had seen Lena entering the Clark home on the afternoon of the murder. His account placed Lena at the scene during the critical window of time, undermining her initial claim that she had been running errands. When it was the defense's turn, they attempted to portray Lena as a woman struggling with emotional turmoil, trapped in a life of isolation and unfulfilled desires. Her attorney argued that the relationship with Emma had been consensual and that Lena's actions, while misguided, were not premeditated. They insisted that the evidence was circumstantial, suggesting that Lena's presence at the Clark home and her possession of the necklace were coincidental. Lena herself took the stand, her demeanor shifting between tearful vulnerability and stoic denial. She described her feelings for Emma as complicated and admitted to being at the house that day, but she claimed the encounter had been amicable. "I didn't kill her," Lena said, her voice trembling. "I would never hurt Emma. She meant too much to me." But the prosecution was relentless. They highlighted the inconsistencies in Lena's statements, her failure to explain the necklace, and her increasingly erratic behavior leading up to the murder. Graves delivered a searing cross-examination, pointing out how Lena's actions spoke louder than her words. "You say you loved her," he said, his voice rising. "But what kind of love leaves a young woman dead in her own home?" The jury deliberated for less than a day. When they returned, the courtroom fell silent, tension hanging in the air like a heavy fog. The foreperson stood, her voice clear as she delivered the verdict: "We, the jury, find the defendant, Lena Morris, guilty of first-degree murder." A murmur rippled through the crowd as the weight of the decision settled over the room. Lena sat frozen, her face pale and expression unreadable. The judge pronounced her sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole, a punishment that reflected the premeditated nature of the crime. For the Clark family, the verdict brought a bittersweet sense of closure. And Clark wept quietly as Jack held her hand, their grief mingling with relief that justice had been served. But the pain of losing Emma was a wound that would never fully heal. Outside the courthouse, the once idyllic image of Springfield had been permanently marred. Neighbors whispered about the case, the shocking details of Lena's double life, and the tragedy that had unfolded in their quiet suburb. Detective Harper Miles, watching from the back of the room, felt a grim satisfaction. The evidence had told the story, and the jury had seen the truth. Yet the cost of that truth weighed heavily on her: a young woman's life stolen, a family broken, and a community left to grapple with its own illusions of perfection. As Lena was led away in handcuffs, her once flawless world reduced to ashes, she cast one final glance at the Clark family. In their tear-streaked faces, she saw the full measure of her actions. And in that moment, any pretense of innocence she had clung to fell away, leaving only the cold reality of her guilt. The conviction of Lena Morris sent shockwaves through Springfield, Illinois. In a community that had prided itself on its picture-perfect suburban life, the revelation of Lena's dark obsession and Emma Clark's tragic death shattered the illusion of tranquility. The story dominated local headlines for weeks, with every new detail adding fuel to the fire of public outrage and fascination. Neighbors who once exchanged warm greetings with Lena now whispered in hushed tones, struggling to reconcile the image of the charming housewife with the cold-blooded murderer she had become. For the Clark family, the verdict brought only a fragile semblance of closure. And Clark, who had always been the heart of her family, seemed a shadow of her former self. She spent her days poring over photo albums, her hands trembling as she traced the images of her daughter. Jack Clark, normally a stoic presence, had grown quieter, his grief manifesting in long, silent stares out the window. The couple's home, once filled with Emma's laughter and light, now echoed with an unbearable silence. Every corner of their house held memories of the daughter they had lost, and no amount of justice could fill the void she left behind. Across the street, the Morris household was equally shattered. Ryan Morris filed for divorce immediately following Lena's arrest, citing irreparable damage to their family. He left Springfield, unable to face the neighbors or the ghosts of his life with Lena. Their two children, shielded as much as possible from the grisly details of the case, struggled to process the loss of both their mother and the life they once knew. The perfect family that Lena had so painstakingly maintained was gone, replaced by fragments of a past no one wanted to revisit. The neighborhood itself bore scars from the tragedy. What had once been a close-knit community where everyone trusted each other now felt fractured. Families locked their doors earlier, avoided eye contact during morning walks, and quietly speculated about what other secrets might lurk behind the pristine facades. Conversations often circled back to Lena and Emma, with residents questioning how they had missed the signs, how such darkness could grow unnoticed in their midst. Detective Harper Miles, though praised for her meticulous work in solving the case, carried the emotional weight of it long after the trial ended. She had seen firsthand how love, when twisted by obsession, could become something destructive, even deadly. Her work had brought justice, but it hadn't brought peace, not to the Clark family, not to the Morris family, and not to the community. The story of Lena and Emma became a cautionary tale, one that parents told their children in whispers, warning them of the dangers of misplaced trust and unchecked desires. It highlighted the fragile balance between love and control, and how easily that balance could tip into tragedy. For those who had known Lena, the lesson was harsher. Even the most seemingly perfect lives could conceal unfathomable darkness. Lena herself now lives out her days in a state prison, far from the life she once curated so carefully. Her cell is stark, devoid of the comforts she once took for granted. She spends her time reflecting on the choices that led her there, though whether she fully accepts responsibility remains unclear. The intensity that once drove her obsession with Emma now turns inward, leaving her to grapple with her actions in the solitude of her confinement. Meanwhile, Springfield has tried to move on, though the scars of the tragedy remain. The Clark home was eventually sold, its new occupants unaware of the pain that once dwelled there. The Morris house, too, was left vacant for a time before being repainted and occupied by a young family trying to start fresh. But the neighbors who stayed remember. They remember the laughter of Emma Clark, the quiet determination of Ann and Jack, and the slow unraveling of Lena Morris. The story's ripple effects extend beyond the individuals involved. It serves as a stark reminder of how the pursuit of perfection and the suppression of inner turmoil can lead to devastating consequences. It reminds the community, and anyone who hears the story, that darkness often lurks where it's least expected. As the seasons change and the years pass, the memory of Emma Clark lingers. Her life, though tragically cut short, has become a symbol of resilience for those left behind. Her parents established a scholarship in her name for young artists, ensuring that Emma's love for creativity would continue to inspire others. In this way, Emma's legacy endures, even as the community she left behind continues to heal. Springfield remains a quiet town, but it will never be the same. The tragedy of Lena Morris and Emma Clark is woven into its history, a haunting tale of love turned to obsession and the devastating cost of unchecked desires. For those who live there, the story is a sobering reminder: no matter how perfect things may seem, darkness can exist in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. The story of Lena Morris and Emma Clark is one that defies easy explanation. It is a tragedy of love warped by obsession, of lives destroyed by secrets, and of a community forever scarred by the darkness that emerged from within its idyllic facade. What began as an affair born of loneliness and unfulfilled desires spiraled into manipulation, violence, and ultimately, death. As Lena sits behind bars, the echoes of her choices continue to ripple through the lives she touched, leaving a trail of pain and unanswered questions. For the Clark family, the loss of Emma is a wound that time cannot fully heal. Her parents, Ann and Jack, have tried to find solace in preserving her memory. The scholarship they established in her name has helped numerous young artists pursue their dreams, a bittersweet legacy for the daughter who never had the chance to fully realize her own. Each recipient of the scholarship is a reminder of the light Emma brought to those around her, a small comfort in the face of an overwhelming absence. Ryan Morris, once the distant yet dutiful husband, now carries the burden of his own guilt and regret. While he was never directly involved in the tragedy, his absence in Lena's life has weighed heavily on him. Moving to a new city, far from the whispers and judgment of Springfield, he has tried to rebuild, but the shadow of his family's implosion follows him. His children, now growing into young adults, grapple with their own complex emotions, torn between love for the mother they once knew and the horror of the woman she became. Springfield itself has been irrevocably changed. The once close-knit community now walks with a sense of wariness, the tragedy a constant reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Neighbors who once shared smiles and warm greetings now avoid each other's eyes, unsure of what lies behind the doors of even the most pristine homes. The streets, once lively with the chatter of friendly conversations, have grown quieter, haunted by the knowledge of what unfolded within their midst. Detective Harper Miles, the woman who unraveled the tangled web of lies and uncovered the truth about Lena, reflects often on the case. For her, it stands as one of the most harrowing chapters of her career. While she takes pride in bringing justice for Emma and her family, the emotional toll of the investigation lingers. The case has reshaped her view of human nature, a grim reminder of how love, when tainted by control and desperation, can lead even the most ordinary people to commit unthinkable acts. The story has also become a cultural cautionary tale, a topic of fascination for true crime enthusiasts and moral philosophers alike. Discussions of Lena's actions often focus on the interplay between isolation, obsession, and unchecked desires. What if Lena had sought help for her emotional struggles? What if Emma had recognized the danger sooner? Could this tragedy have been prevented, or was it an inevitable consequence of choices made and paths crossed? In the end, the story leaves more questions than answers. It is a stark reminder of the fragility of human connections and the devastating consequences that can arise when boundaries are crossed. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about love, control, and the masks people wear to hide their inner turmoil. As Lena serves her life sentence, she remains an enigma. Interviews with psychologists and criminologists paint conflicting pictures of her psyche, a woman driven by deep-seated loneliness, a manipulator consumed by her own needs, or perhaps something in between. She has given few public statements, and when she does, her words are vague, tinged with both regret and denial. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she has said, a sentiment that provides little solace to those left in the wake of her actions. For Springfield, life has moved on, but the scars remain. The Clark and Morris homes have new occupants, families unaware of the tragedy that unfolded within their walls. But for those who lived through it, the memory of Emma Clark and the fall of Lena Morris lingers like a ghost. They are reminders that beneath the surface of even the most perfect-seeming lives, darkness can lurk, waiting for the slightest crack to emerge. As the years pass, the story continues to captivate those who hear it. It speaks to the universal truths of human vulnerability and the thin line between love and obsession. It warns of the dangers of ignoring warning signs and the importance of seeking help before emotions spiral out of control. Most of all, it stands as a testament to the cost of unchecked desires, a cost paid not just by those directly involved but by everyone whose lives they touched. In the quiet evenings of Springfield, where the streets are once again peaceful and the lawns perfectly manicured, one cannot help but feel the weight of what transpired. It is a reminder that the shadows of the past can linger, even in the brightest of places. For Lena, Emma, and the town they called home, the lessons of their story are etched into the fabric of the community, a chilling cautionary tale of love, loss, and the darkness that can reside within us all.